by combat. Yes, I think that's exactly what needs to be going on. Are we already live on this? Oh, we are live on this. Yeah. Well, hello, everyone who is tuning in right now. I'm going to give it just a minute here for people to kind of join us here on YouTube. This is our new venture here at Digital Trends, which is going to be, I'm looking up there, which is going to be our computing show. So we're going to be doing this once a week, where we're going to be talking about different issues, different things, different products that have to do with computers. This is going to be a lot more in-depth than what we normally go into. And what we really want are people to comment and talk along with us. Let us know what you want to talk about. Today's subject is the AMD Radeon RX 480. I feel like I have to give it like a monster truck voice for it.
Yeah.
Maybe some like bullhorns or something, some sound effects afterwards. The RX 480. So we're going to be talking about this and going in depth with it. We're going to be doing a bit of a review. We've got our experts here with us. We want to know your thoughts on it. We're also still trying to come up with a name for this show. I think things that have been thrown out so far were Chip Chat. Chat is pretty good. Between what was the other one? Between the computers or something along those lines. We're still working up some names. So go ahead and pop in your names there if you have some suggestions. But I think to start off here, why don't we go ahead and introduce our cast of characters who will be here for every episode of this new show. To my right, we've got...
I'm Brad Burke. I'm staff writer for the computing section.
Excellent. And...
I'm Matt Smith, senior editor for the computing section.
In the podcast, I'll dub in air horns behind each one of you after each one of those things. So, yeah, today we're going to be talking about the AMD Radeon RX 480. And let's be honest about this show. I don't know a whole lot about this. So I'm going to be kind of asking some questions as we go to try to understand a little bit more about what we're talking about. These guys are the experts. These are the guys who have been reviewing it. So with this, gentlemen, maybe we should just go ahead and get started. So, Matt, you just wrote a whole review of the AMD Radeon RX 480 GPU graphics processing unit. I just trying to show off my skills by, reading out everything. The AMD, the Advanced Micro Designs, for those of you who don't know. All right, tell us about this. So it's a mid-level graphics card that has come out.
Right.
Okay.
So it is $200.
It is $200.
And it's the first graphics card from AMD that used their new Polaris. Was it Polaris that we
Polaris,
said?
well, yeah, we were talking about that because at the PC gaming show they rolled out, and they weren't sure it was Polaris.
Said?
Yeah, I think Polaris.
So it was Polaris architecture, which is their new hotness. And so they announced we've been talking about this for a while, and then they officially announced the RX 480 at Computex about a few weeks ago, and now it's here. And so it's kind of interesting, even though it is the first video card to have this new Polaris architecture, it is affordable.
Okay,
That's
so
been the entire point of the card.
So it's in the mid-range, so it's not at the very super high end, which I guess would normally be like Nvidia cards would be the higher end. So what is Polaris before we get going? Like explain what Polaris means.
So Polaris it's mostly a die shrink, really. So it's new architecture, but a lot of the focus is on reducing the production process size from the 28 nanometer node, which is what it was before, to 14 nanometers.
Okay.
And whenever you make the production process, you have a smaller production process, you get gains in efficiency. The transistors are smaller. You can put more into a space, and they use less power. So this was a big leap because due to some production issues and so on, both AMD and Nvidia sort of found themselves stuck on using this 28 nanometer node for years. Normally they'd want to reduce it every 2 years or so. They weren't able to do that like they normally would. So
why weren't they able to do that?
Well, basically because the people who make their chips were having some problems getting the appropriate new production processes online.
Okay, so because of that,
because AMD doesn't make it, like a lot of companies, AMD doesn't make its own chips. There's
okay.
other companies that make the chips for them. TSMC and Samsung, I think, are the sources for Polaris.
Okay.
So anyway, so the reduction's a lot bigger than you would normally expect. Normally you would expect you go down at 8 nanometers or something. This is 14 or 16? I can't.
Yeah, this is 14.
So that's a big jump. That's a big jump.
Yeah, it's a big
generation.
jump. So you're going to see a big jump in efficiency, and that means a big jump in performance because you can pack a lot more transistors into that same GPU space.
And this is what the Polaris system is.
That's the big improvement of Polaris.
Okay.
As an architecture, there's also going to be some other tweaks and changes, but they're not really that big a deal compared to the actual die shrink.
Okay, and so this is going mid-range, but they have not always tried to be mid-range, right? AMD, this is kind of one of the big things of what they were trying to do previously.
Well, both AMD and Nvidia have always had a selection of cards.
Okay.
A wide selection of cards, and they always cover the whole gamut. But last year, AMD put out some new cards called the Fury line, and they tried to go like really high-end and compete with Nvidia specifically on up to 4K gaming, but it didn't quite work out.
Why didn't it work out?
They didn't really perform as well as they should have or needed to beat Nvidia. So those kind of.
Well, and at the same price point, you could pick up a 980 Ti. That was sort of the killer card that,
right,
for the same price as one of those other cards for the Fury or the Fury X, you could have the Nvidia option, which just outperformed them. Like it was just sort of on paper.
They're just better.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there really wasn't much reason to buy those Fury cards.
And so what they're trying to do now, they've moved away from that. They're going back to kind of more their wheelhouse. Is that what this is? The middle of the road ones?
Yeah, I think you could probably say that. I think that over the last half decade or more, there has been sort of a sense that AMD maybe focuses more heavily on the value card and the value market. And so this is kind of returning to that. And they were talking about that a lot, like at their press conferences, like, we're the card for the everyday gamer, and like we've got your back. We're we found like this is what most people actually want. And they sort of like kind of portrayed themselves as less elitist. They're putting out this card that anyone can afford.
The everyman card.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And so it's targeted in what kind of dollar range are we talking about for this one?
It's $200 even.
$200
And the thing that they sort of like their whole spiel about that is that it's the 84% of people who building gaming PCs spend between $100 and $300 on their graphics card. So why not just hit that right in the middle?
Versus a high-end Nvidia card would normally be what?
I think where the 1070 is like $379 for the reference version.
Okay, so definitely you're saving some money on that. We've got some questions that are coming in too, and I don't know where the appropriate time is to drop in this question, but here I'll ask this one really quick. Somebody is asking how this performs compared to the fastest GTX 970s out there.
The fastest GTX 970s. Well, let's just say this. So the review we had some GTX 970s.
We can circle
results.
back to that if you want.
No, we can go ahead. Talk about some performance stuff. So GTX 970 we did compare it to, and the RX 480 is a little bit slower, but not by much. The margin was around 10-15% in most benchmarks. Now, if you're talking about the fastest 970s, I don't know exactly what you'd be talking about. I assume some overclocked models, so they would be a little quicker still. But the RX 480 is sort of nipping at the heels of the 970, which is right now, for the sort of base mid-level versions of the 970, it's a $300 card. And if you're talking about the fastest 970s, I assume those would be like 320, 330, maybe 340. So definitely the value of the RX 480 is looking very nice there. Okay.
All right. And go ahead and keep on putting your questions in there too if you're watching live right now, and I will ask those of the guys as we go through. Okay, so back to more of the design, like more of what we're talking about with Polaris. What are some other things here with this? Now, I noticed, in your review, you have some of your talking points here are FinFET, which I have no idea what that means. So what is a Fin? Sounds like a character from Star Wars. What is FinFET?
It's 3D transistors, basically.
Okay.
And there's been.
What does it stand for? So I can start learning some more acronyms.
I think
I busted you, Stan.
I think it has to do with the metal.
Is the fin field effect transistor? Oh yeah, because the transistors are constructed as like fins that cut across a line rather than being flat on.
That's
top
what
of
I assumed it was. So I'm glad you clarified that. Yeah, just Anyway, all right. So the FinFET. So this is something that's kind of unique that they're doing with this.
It's not unique, but it's the first time that we've had 14 nanometer FinFETs on a video card, and that just contributes to the overall die shrink production process improvements that we've been making. This is something that like Intel's been using on its processors, although they call it, I think, just 3D transistors. They have their own name for it, but they've been using on the processors for a while. And we haven't, because the video cards were stuck on that 28 nanometer node. We hadn't seen them in video card technology, but now they're here. But I believe Nvidia also uses FinFETs, Brad?
For the new ones, for the 1070 and 1080.
But they are on a 16 nanometer node,
which is
so
bigger.
They don't quite get to claim the 14 nanometer FinFET first. This is the first 14 nanometer one.
So AMD is kind of breaking it with this.
Yeah.
All right. Now, let's go on to some of the performance issues. And I'm seeing some questions that are starting to come up here. Somebody just asked, double up with the AMD or get a 1080. I'm not sure if that's something that you guys can...
Like a pretty broad question, I would
Okay,
say.
that's too
Well,
broad.
as far as like your needs go, but I don't know. Like I think we've generally seen that like Crossfire setups and SLI setups tend to be not always that compatible.
Okay.
That you do tend to run into issues with that. So if like you're really chasing high performance, a single card solution tends to be a lot cleaner.
Okay.
But hard to say. It's a big price difference too. Even when you look at the cost of a 1080, which is like $600 or $700 versus 400,
Two of these
$400 bucks. Yeah,
so.
for two of these. So.
Yeah, well, that's so... All right, there's a big difference right there. Well, let's talk about the performance here. The 1080p, and what this is capable of.
Yeah, so basically the big news out of this is that it pushes the $200 price point video card to 1440p capable. So that's 2560 by 1440 resolution. Previously, really, you could only do 1080p reliably. We're talking about like if you want to play the latest games at high or the maximum detail level. It used to be that you really had to kind of stick with 1080p. Maybe you want to play older games, you could play them at higher resolutions, but like Battlefield 4 or Fallout 4, those sort of games, you had to stick with 1080p. And that used to be okay. Like a few years back, that was fine. But now, monitor prices, they always get cheaper, and now you can get some pretty decent gaming monitors for, 1440p for $300 or $400, and so.
But you were stuck with.
You were stuck with the fact that if you wanted to do that upgrade for your monitor, then you had to leap to like a $350, $400 graphics card.
So that's a pretty pricey.
But now you don't. Now you can get the $200 RX 480, and you can enjoy.
And it'll work with these new monitors.
It'll power them nicely. So.
All right, Brad, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I think it alone that the fact that it jumps out of 1080p is impressive because we saw really impressive results in 1080p. It just shattered pretty much every game in our test suite, and even like really kept up at 1440p. And I remember testing the 950 and 960 and saying like, "Wow, this is really cool. These cards are totally 1080p compliant at $200." And it seems like this is months later, and we're looking at from a competitor's card, something totally different.
Okay. Well, and with this, with this jump in ability with this kind of performance, and everything becoming more graphics heavy, especially for video games, and the more that's out there, the more that's available. Let's talk about some VR. Like, is this something that would be able to help out with that, with virtual reality, like with running that? Because I know, with like the Vive and all the different platforms that are out there that are running on standalone PCs, you have to invest pretty heavily in some basic computing parts just to make it work. Computing parts, that was my high tech word I just used right there. I had something there and I was trying to save it and I totally lost it. But anyway, so some basic infrastructure to make those things work. Is this something that could help out with that?
It is.
With your computing parts.
They're computing parts. Yeah, it's a really nice computing part. They talk
CPs,
about,
as I call them, so I'm making up my own acronyms.
That was one of the big things AMD wanted was to like push out the RX 480 as a really low cost VR solution because you don't have to get in at this really high price. But what we tested it. I did a brief test on our test rig, which is using a 6950X, which is like a massively fast 10-core processor, and we got a 9.7 on the Steam VR performance test, which is really high, mostly I think thanks to the processor. But it does show
9.7 out of 10.
Out of 11.
Out of 11.
Which is, kind of funny. But, I think the thing about it is that VR performance, when you talk about a 970 or an R9 as the base, that's not... It's a base experience. It's not really the, optimal VR performance. You're not going to be able to get super sampling going or anything like that with those cards. and you might even have to compromise. Their games are built to just sort of read that and say, okay, that's what I'm expecting, from performance. And I think it's not going to blow people away. Maybe, I think it is VR capable, and I think because the Rift and the Vive are built for that sort of base entry level model, it'll work fine.
Sweet.
But I think I'll be interested to see how it works out, especially I'd love to try it paired up with like a nice i5 or something. You just like really hit that base level and see what the performance comes up to. Because I've seen numbers. I don't want to like report on other people's numbers, but that it puts it in range of the R9 or a little above on the Steam VR performance test. So
okay, all right.
Think of the talk about it another way. So it's a 1440p capable card. So 1440p comes out to about 3.7 million pixels on the screen. Now, VR headsets are running 2160 by 1200 resolution. That comes out to about 2.6 million pixels on the screen. So about 2/3. So you would generally expect then that, on a VR headset, the performance as far as the frame rate is going to be pretty good compared to our 1440p hardware results. They're going to be probably around 30% higher or so, 25 to 30% higher. And so when you're doing a VR headset, complication is that you have to meet a higher refresh rate. It's like 90 hertz.
It is. And 90 is like sort of you want to keep your frame rate above that consistently.
Yeah. And I don't know if the RX 480 could do that at maximum detail in every title necessarily. Probably not, but it would be pretty close. And so I would say that the AMD is generally right. Like it is a VR capable video card, and so and maybe every now and then you meet a game where you have to like turn a detail setting down or something. But generally speaking, I think it would work really well for that.
So a question coming through really quick is AMD's FreeSync technology still limited to 90 hertz?
Well, they didn't tell us anything new about FreeSync in regards to this video card.
Okay.
So,
we don't know for sure.
Yeah, I didn't do any extra research about that in regards to this video card. So unless they had announced something previously,
I didn't see anything about it there.
No.
But.
Okay. Going through here, just some more questions too. If you're turning in live, go ahead and drop your questions there into the YouTube chat. And let's see, question here from That Mr. Tennant says when AIB RX 480 cards, AMD, I'm assuming that's what he meant to say, or RX 480 cards are out and the AMD drivers are more mature, will cross-firing two of these cards be better bang for the buck than a GTX 1080 AIB? Okay, never mind, I was saying that wrong. AIB. Does that make sense? How I just explained that?
Yeah.
Okay.
No. That's anybody's. Well, I mean,
they showed off. What was it? Ashes of the Singularity benchmarks that were sort of saying like, in this really niche case of like DX12 feature compatibility, basically that a pair of RX 480s is working well. But that also leverages things like DirectX 12 multi GPU support and like things like I don't know. Crossfire is fine, but I feel like that's sort of the move that they're making is towards DirectX 12 multi GPU because I think the support there is a little better and it's built right into the engine rather than sort of having to leverage your cards afterward.
Right. I mean, I would say as general rule of thumb, I never recommend multi GPU unless you are in a situation where one GPU literally cannot provide you the performance that you need. Because Crossfire and SOI have come a long way. They're better and better. There's not all the, used to be you had problems with the frames syncing up properly, blah, blah, blah. But you can still run into trouble every now and then. It doesn't scale perfectly in most situations.
Some games just don't support it
Some games just don't support it at all sometimes. Or like a new title will come out and then it'll be like, Crossfire support's coming out in 3 weeks. Something like that. So just don't deal with all that hassle. It's like I think people like want to think like they're gonna cheat the system and get like 2 of this one card, and it's gonna be like, oh, haha, like I got it for cheaper than you, and it's so amazing. But it doesn't. Don't do that. Like just if you think you
That's
want
a hard no.
If you want a 1080s performance, if you need that, then just buy a 1080. So
there you go. Matt just scolded you. That's what you're trying to do. All right, so moving on from that, now you guys I know had some kind of differing opinions on on some of this. Brad, you were bringing this up beforehand. What is it that you're disagreeing with?
Well, I think, part of the, I don't know if it's a disagreement, but, about price point.
I want you guys to fight.
Maybe
is what I'm trying to do.
That I think this is a smart play. We talked about the fact that like the 1080 and the 1070 they're expensive cards. They really push the boundaries of, 4K gaming and all this stuff. But, when you look at the Steam hardware tracker, most people are still playing at 1080p, and most people are, making that transition slowly to 1440 and less often to 4K, because it is a really big expense. And I think that this is a smart move to say, like, we need, as a company, to get our cards into computers right now. We need to get people buying our products. We need to get people using our products and enjoying them. And especially if you can put out a product that you say $200 and you're just going to be able to play at 1080p. Everyone's got a 1080p monitor, so just go for it. Let loose, turn up the settings, have a good time. I think is a really good market play, especially because they haven't been able to compete at the top end. It's hard to recommend. I like the Fury as a card. It seems really it's a cool card, and it's closed loop liquid cooling and all that. But
it just doesn't.
If someone asked me, I'm like, yeah, 980 Ti, that's the card. But yeah, I think this is a good market play for them.
Yeah, to try to stick with that kind of middle ground.
And to say that's the top, and we're just going to push even further down. And I think those new cards too have a possibility of also strong 1080p performance.
So you just don't think AMD's ever going to be able to compete with Nvidia?
I don't know about ever, but I think right now it's important again to like put cards in computers to get people back on their side and saying this is a good product, so that when the next one, when the 490 or whatever happens, whatever happens next rolls out, people are willing to make that upgrade, and they're willing to say, I've been using AMD and I like this card and I want to keep moving. Because right now it's hard when you move from a 780 Ti or a GTX 950 and the new Nvidia card comes out and you just go, well, I might as well get a 1070 or a 1080.
Okay. Matt, what are your thoughts?
And you said, like, you don't think AMD is going to be competitive with Nvidia on the high end. And that's sort of the question. And there's no disputing that this is a good market play, for AMD to come out with this card at $200 and be like, we're doing the everyman's card and etc. That's great. The problem, and this has always been AMD's problem for the past decade, really, is that it's kind of feels like their only market play.
Yeah.
They don't. It's not really clear they have the option to beat the 1080. Probably they can't. And so the problem then is what's going to happen in 3 months when the 1060 comes out. Because as long as Nvidia has the better overall architecture, then AMD can come out with that RX 480 and it's going to be great right now. But then Nvidia can say, well, okay, we'd like to beat that, so we're just going to shimmy around our transistor, our compute unit counts, and shimmy around our RAM counts till we have something that beats that, and we're going to sell it at the same price. Then AMD is going to cut their price, and NVIDIA is going to cut the price. But NVIDIA is always going to have the advantage as long as that its architectures are overall performing better. It's the same thing that's happened, with AMD and Intel. There are areas where technically AMD's processors might be competitive in certain ways with Intel's processors, but
not to get too off topic on processors, but under $100. There's still a good argument to be made for AMD processors because they're really limited Intel options at that price point.
Right, and that's why AMD doesn't make any money.
Oh, okay, we're going straight to there.
You don't make money selling budget products.
So you think even though this is going to be a nice card, it's not going to sell enough to be?
It'll sell tons, but you don't make a lot of margin off those budget products.
Okay.
Products, and that's the problem for AMD because building architectures requires a lot of money.
Yeah.
And AMD's entire problem, business-wise, over the last decade is that they got hit by Intel, and there's a lot to be said about the antitrust suits that came in and require that. But one way or another, they got hit by Intel. Intel, put them behind, and ever since then, they've just been making, struggling along, not really making enough money to put in the really heavy R&D that you would want to come out with the really high-end architecture.
Okay.
And so that's why, after Computex, after they announced the RX 480, I was like, this is great. It's probably not going to make AMD suddenly like the amazing company that's, going to be everybody's comeback story next year.
Right.
It still has the same fundamental problem that they just don't have the money to put in the R&D.
Well, the bottom line here are some of the questions that we've got coming into. There's a bunch of them. I'm going to try to pick a few of them. If you've got some, drop them in there, and I'll get some of them in. Should I wait for companies to release their version of 480 or not?
A lot of them are already out. I think a lot of the non-reference versions, the third-party ones, I was seeing ads for them already.
Okay.
Yeah, let's take a look at Newegg here real quick. See what we got.
Somebody was saying I was in there somewhere.
But generally speaking, I would say yeah, probably. I mean, the non-reference designs should. Usually these days they tend to improve on the reference design. Now I will say, like right now on Newegg, we only have reference designs. I had heard that it was mostly going to be reference designs at launch, if not all reference designs. Even if it's going to be from other brands, like it would be the reference design. And that was supposedly because they want to make sure this is not a paper launch. Cough, cough, NVIDIA.
Yeah.
NVIDIA has had their launches of their recent video cards, then they come out and they just don't have enough products.
Well, and especially you look at like the 1070 is the same story right now, where that's, in a lot of ways, that was, I think, the card that people wanted when the two got announced. They say, here's this big, expensive 1080, and then here's the, the more budget-friendly, power-friendly version, and finding one is sort of a chore right now. Like, it's really tough to find a 1070.
All right, so what else would you guys like to add here that I haven't asked, or that you want to get to about this? It's a big, when it's available now.
Yeah,
the AMD.
There is one available on Newegg right now. Of the three that are on there, only one is in stock. It's a Sapphire, but you can buy it. So
okay, so you can pick it up now. What else do you want to add on to this, Brad? Do you have anything else that you wanted to add in about this card?
I think specifically about this card, I think it's again, I said it's a good market play, but I'm excited to see where the other two cards end up in this family, because I think that this is, like you were saying, they can kind of chase AMD with the 1060, and I think AMD can continue to stay ahead of that and try and push this even further down. But I do think it's weird that there's sort of like, this card was very targeted. They said this is a VR card, it's 1080p, 1440p performance, and it's $200. But the other ones, they said one is esports performance, which doesn't really make sense. And they also said one is power proficiency, which is also sort of an odd thing to shoot for. But, I think it's an interesting thing to see this company sort of pivoting and trying to find a place for themselves in this market they're being pushed out of pretty quickly.
All right. Matt?
I'm really hoping this will put some more competition in the market, because honestly the market wasn't very competitive over the last year. And that meant that we weren't seeing a lot of movement on prices and on performance value. I remember that like 5-7 years ago, there was like this real golden era of value performance, where Nvidia and AMD were really going at each other with budget cards, and those were like just the cards they get from a value perspective. And then recently, I think that kind of trailed off a little bit. If you look at the benchmarks of something like a GTX 960 versus a 970, 960 is cheaper, but it's not really clear if you're getting a better value than a 970. Like, it's maybe a little bit, but it's not like it used to be.
Yeah.
Where it was like just clearly better the value. You get that mid-range card, and then you were really paying a big premium with each step up. So I hope that with this RX 480 being so quick, that Nvidia will have to really be aggressive with the 1060 and the rest of its lineup, and that we'll see some good competition. And maybe by the end of the year, we'll start seeing RX 480s for $180 or something, and 1060s
see the price start to drop.
That would be really great. So.
Well, the full review is at digitaltrends.com, too, for everybody to go there. You can read the entire thing. Matt's got a really in-depth article about it. The bottom line, I think the tagline is, you're impressed with it, or you think it's a good card.
Yeah, it's a very good card. It's only, as I said in the review, it is the only mid-range card that matters right now. If you want a card around $200 or $150 or $250, then just go buy an RX 480. None of the other cards matter anymore.
This is the one. So the AMD Radeon RX 480. And I want to say this to you, for everybody tuning in via YouTube, thank you so much for joining us. And, I've tried to get to some of the questions that are in there, but if you're just joining us now, there's a ton of stuff at the beginning of this video where we went in depth on a bunch of different stuff. So feel free to rewatch the video, share it, let your friends know about it, and all of those things. And of course, watch the review, or read the review, the full one, at digitaltrends.com, that you can go there. Thank you, everyone. One more thing, too, before we go. So we're going to be doing these probably every week where we'll go in depth on something in computing related. And we're looking for a name. So if you can think of a name for this series, Chip Chat was the one that was thrown out here. But if you've got ideas, post those in the comments on this or on Facebook or wherever you're finding this article or this video. Let us know what your ideas are, because I think we'll take those into consideration as we go forward. So once again, I'm Greg Nibbler here with Brad Burke, Matt Smith. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll be back next week with something else that we'll be bringing for you. Thanks a lot.